Paul Watson joining us from the United Kingdom. Headline at prisonplanet.com, state of war between two Koreas after armistice ended. This is a big deal. And you add to this all the military forces moving around the globe from Eastern Europe through Central Asia, right into the Far East and the Korean Peninsula. This is serious business. Paul Watson.
Well, Alex, good to be back.
Good to have you here. Break down your take on what's happening right now, and then let's get into who really gave North Korea and Pakistan the nukes.
Well, as you just mentioned, North Korea is now repudiating the 1953 armistice, which was it wasn't a peace treaty, it was just basically a ceasefire that ended the Korean War. And now they're saying that is now not in effect, according to an official statement by the Korean Central News Agency. And they're also saying that any attempt to inspect North Korean vessels, which South Korea has said it will do with U.S. help, with the U.S. running the program, will be countered with, quote, prompt and strong military strikes. And we know that as soon as North Korea does anything against South Korea, then the U.S. is going to come to South Korea's aid. North Korea is allied with China, and just as during the Korean War, the Chinese military will support North Korea. And that will only be emphasized more so with the fact that U.S. troops, if they're sent over there, will be right on the border with China, because China borders North Korea. So that's how serious
Exactly. I hadn't even made that point that over 1 million Chinese troops were engaging the Marine Corps and Army and Air Force during the Korean conflict, as it was called. This is insane.
Right. So, the armistice in 1953 wasn't even signed by South Korea. It was signed by the U.S. and the United Nations. So, technically, North Korea and South Korea have always been in a state of war because they never signed a proper peace treaty. But that fragile ceasefire, that armistice, was still virtually in effect until today, when North Korea completely renounced it and basically declared that they're now in a state of war with South Korea. And if South Korea makes any movement whatsoever, then they're going to attack. Whether that's believable with what Kim Jong said in the past remains to be seen, but it's a very serious situation. Because if you remember, on the eve of the Iraq War in early 2003, when the threat of Saddam Hussein was being propagandized by the U.S. government and the media, the non-existent threat, as was soon to be revealed, Kim Jong-il was saying that he was going to, quote, destroy the world, and that was played down at the time by the media and by the U.S. government because they didn't want such obvious saber-rattling while they were trying to make the case that Iraq was the major threat, when Iraq was displaying fealty to everything that the U.S. and the United Nations was doing in terms of inspections. But now we're hearing the same rhetoric by Kim Jong-il out of North Korea. Not only by him, obviously by Japan as well, as you mentioned before. They're threatening to attack. But now it seems a lot more serious because of this second nuclear test. Now, what was interesting about the first nuclear test was that originally they claimed that North Korea didn't claim, but the Russians and others claimed that it was 50 megaton blast. It turned out to be 1. And the latest one has turned out to be less powerful as well. It's only turned out to be about a quarter of what it was, the power that it was originally.
Exactly. These are tiny A-bombs. If they're even that, they're probably just packing those tunnels full of a football field of TNT to register on the Richter scales, because they're not picking up uranium and plutonium. We are breaking down the geopolitical angles to all of this and open phones throughout the broadcast today. Got one of the C-Think production guys that put out the New World Order film popping in for about 15 minutes at the end of the show today to give his comments on the incredible success of the film, but also the different sides that are attacking him. The left is attacking him, saying, how dare you make these people look so good? Some Ron Paul people are calling him, saying, hey, you did this as a hit piece against Ron Paul, the time to 9/11 truth. That's kind of the mainline Republican ninnies. Hey, now Michael Savage says the government stages terror attacks. He's afraid Obama's going to do it. You guys are so stupid out there. And some of the other things that are going on. So that is coming up. And we're talking to Paul Watson. Paul, the world is a dangerous place. Governments killed conservatively, just the big governments, 200 plus million people last century. In fact, I show 200 million killed in Endgame and forgot to put what the Soviets did. I just messed up on the graph when I was telling the graphics guy. So it's 250 million at least. But let's just be conservative and say 200 million, because I did put the communist Chinese in there. I mean, government's the number one cause of death, unnatural death. And they're running around jockeying for global dominance and power. These people are bored. All the money, all the sex, they're sick of it. They want war. They want power. This is the big game. You know, they call the most dangerous game hunting people, and you can still do that in Africa today. And it's been done, you know, by many ancient cultures. The Romans did it. The Babylonians did it. The Aztecs did it. Native Americans did it. Some of the tribes would capture other tribes and hunt them. Some of the Gaelic groups would do that. The point is, humans do this. Well, the elite do it on a mass scale. And, I mean, Paul, looking at the RAND Corporation document, I know your article gets into that. Let's get into RAND Corporation wanting war from your angle, needing war, what they said, and it's all tied in this masterpiece you did, and Kurt Nemo's done a similar excellent piece that covers some of the other angles. State of war between two Koreas after armistice ended, prisonplanet.com. Paul Watson, Kurt Nemo, North Korea ends armistice, threatens to attack South Korea. That's Infowars.com. Different perspectives, different angles, because there's so many different stratas of this story. Watson, let's get into the RAND Corporation situation, historically what this means. It looks like battle lines are being drawn globally, and then let's explain who's given the nukes to Pakistan, who's given the nukes to North Korea, and who's even given the nukes, U.S., England, and Israel, and Halliburton to Iran. I mean, this is incredible. Every time it's the same people. And the question is, why do these countries take, it's like all the old Westerns where the evil guys just shot the little pan miners, been out there panning some gold. And there's a lot of true stories that these Louis L'Amour books and things are based on. And they come up and shoot the old daddy panning for gold, and his 12-year-old gets up and starts throwing punches at the bad guys sent by the railroad to steal the claim. And then they throw a gun down at the kid's feet and say, pick up the gun, kid, pick it up. And the kid picks up the gun and they shoot him. Anyways, I'm ranting, Watson. Go ahead.
Well, yeah, the Rand story was something we reported on it in October last year. And it was a story that came out of the Chinese media, which is obviously state media. But there was no apparent motive to making the story up. And it said that the Rand Corporation had gone to the Pentagon and lobbied for a new war. They said they needed a new, bigger conflict. North Korea was mentioned, but it was ruled out because they said they needed something bigger. Now, obviously, North Korea on its own is a small country, but if you're talking about American troops on the border of China, then that's World War III, if it escalates. They also mentioned Japan. Whether in the context they could attack Japan or set Japan up is unclear, but we know that Japan, yesterday, their former defense minister, who's still in the ruling government, said Japan should basically abolish its pacifist constitution so they could attack North Korea with cruise missiles. So Japan could be involved in that way. But, yeah, North Korea was mentioned by Rand, but it was apparently ruled out at the time. My only hope is that this doesn't escalate, because the impression, from what I understand, is that China treats North Korea in the sense of keep your friends close, but keep your enemies closer. So with that, if that's the case, I would hope that China is prepared to sacrifice North Korea for the purposes of not escalating this into what could potentially be World War III. And from what I've read, Chinese military officials are talking to Russian and South Korean military officials on how they can defuse it. So hopefully that will be the case. But these things can escalate out of control. I mean, Pakistan and India were on the brink of nuclear war in 2002. People don't understand how close that came to being a reality. So these things can escalate quickly. And the fact that I'm in China next week, obviously, because China borders North Korea,